Hey everyone, welcome back to Data Driven Health Radio. I'm your host, Dave Korsunski. My guest today is Don Moxley, and Don and his company have created an incredibly exciting supplement product, one of the first I've seen that's directly targeted at improving heart rate variability, which, in my opinion, is one of the most important biomarkers that everyone should be familiar with and pay attention to on a day to day basis. Excited to learn about how the whole thing came about and get you educated on this product. I've been using it myself personally for the last 3 weeks, and it's now officially part of my stack that I take every night before bed. We've done a lot of testing on this product with Don to validate the efficacy of the product so we know it works. So we're going to dive in today and talk about heart rate variability, and then specifically how Don's company and his product can help you optimize HRV. If you measure HRV, you know that it's basically how you're going to perform day to day. That's pretty much it. So, like, if you want to wake up and kick maximum ass every single day, I engineer my whole routine around heart rate variability. That's it. So, I was extremely excited to see this product come to life. Don, welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks, Dave. I'm excited to be here.
So, Don, tell us about what led you to create this product.
Well, I have a background. I have a long background in using HRV. 30 years ago, when I worked for Polar, the heart rate monitor company, they had been launching products, and this is before smartphones, and they had been launching products that used HRV and some of their features, and all of a sudden I started to understand, okay, this is a valuable tool. Continued to evolve with it over the years, but in 2015 through 18, I worked as a sports scientist with the Ohio State wrestling program, and we used HRV, and I'll send you a link to a presentation we did on that. But we basically used HRV, and we learned to figure out that this could predict success for us at the national tournament. That based on HRV scores, I knew who would be an All-American and who wouldn't. So
Yep.
when you have that kind of a variable, you can then focus on that. You can build programming around that.
Totally.
So we did a ton of it, and it was very successful. While I was working there, I had friends in the industry that had reached out to me and asked about what I know about cannabis and HRV. And at the time, I didn't know anything. My guys are NCAA athletes, and cannabis is not on the menu at that point. But started to do some research, and coincidentally, the universe led me into that role. So I wound up down in Florida as the director of applied science for a cannabis company down there, and did a deep dive into understanding and learned this term that was called the endocannabinoid system, part of your central nervous system that is named after the cannabis molecule. This should be taught in chapter 2 of Exercise 101. The endocannabinoid system is where so much of the magic happens with exercise. When you exercise, you produce an endocannabinoid called anandamide.
An endogenous one.
An endogenous one, exactly. And I thought, okay, this is really interesting. So I continued to figure this out, and I worked on some combinations of cannabinoids and terpenes, and had worked up some recipes. So moved forward a couple years. I'm working with Longevity Labs, and Longevity Labs is a company that our main product is an autophagy product called Spermidine Life. We saw people reporting. We were big in the biohacking community. We had people telling us, hey, this is helping my HRV. This is helping my sleep. So we started to explore that, and we said, you know what, maybe it's time for a nutritional supplement directed towards HRV improvement. So we took the recipes that I'd developed working in the cannabis industry, we packaged them, with in a different carrier oil. We packaged them in an omega-3 fat carrier oil instead of most cannabis is done in a coconut oil. We put this in an omega-3 and launched the product, and have been very happy with the results we got.
Wow. So your life experience, like you said, it just kind of serendipitously led you down this path. You worked at Polar, which is all about heart rate measurement, heart rate variability measurement. So you had all that experience. Then you worked coaching athletes, and you were probably one of the few people at that time who was astute enough to know the correlations between HRV and performance. And then you got into the cannabis research, and then you got the opportunity with Longevity Labs. It's like the whole thing really came together for you to apply everything you'd learned at each stop along that journey.
Serendipity is a good word, isn't it?
Yeah,
So yeah, it was really interesting. And when Daniel Dietz, the CEO of, it was funny when Daniel came to me. He's our CEO of Longevity Labs, and he said, "So can we do a supplement?" And I said, "Daniel, I've already, when I was in cannabis in Florida, my wife and daughter were still living back in Ohio, so I was essentially in a one-bedroom apartment down in West Palm Beach, and my kitchen looked like Breaking Bad. I mean, I had beakers and gram scales and the whole thing. I was figuring out cannabis,
love it.
and it doesn't take long to look at the research and what's going on there to recognize. And again, the link to the endocannabinoid system, the link, and I think this is where it's valuable being an exercise physiologist and having a deep understanding of the physiology of exercise. You're able to pull in these tangential references to, again, whether it's anxiety or HRV or recovery or stress or trauma. These things start to come into play, and you start to recognize what's happening in the cannabis industry. Cannabis is an amazing tool when used correctly, but
Absolutely.
but the challenge is that the cannabis industry, we legalize it on the back of cancer patients and epileptics, and then it immediately becomes an adult use rec community in the state. It's a race for THC, and everybody just overlooks these other long tail cannabinoids and terpenes. And I spent some time looking at that, and it didn't take us long to figure out, okay, this makes sense. These two things go together. And so that's where the supplement came from.
Awesome, man. I think you got a winner on your hands. Heads Up has been a part of the integrative medicine community for many, many years. And we have been involved in a number of conferences on functional oncology, which is treating cancer through basically non chemotherapy based interventions.
Sure.
A huge part of those conferences, and this is years ago, I was sitting in the audience listening to these speakers talk about specific strains of cannabis, specific types of terpenes, specific matching that you have to do based on the type of cancer you have to the type of CBD or terpene profile. It's pharmaceutical, it's nutraceutical medicine, and there's a lot of domain expertise. You can't just go buy the first cannabis product on the shelf at MedMen if you have cancer and it's going to work. You really need to know. It's almost like prescribing a drug. You have to know the type of cancer, maybe the genetic of the individual. And there's a really cool company we worked with, Endocanna Health. You probably know those guys.
Yep.
And they help you do a genetic profile to determine how you're going to respond to cannabis. I have my stepmom, the tiniest little bit, and she's miserable. And then you have other people in the family who actually tolerate it extremely well. So we've seen it come up in the integrative medicine world, also like you said, the epilepsy world. We've done a lot with the Charlie Foundation and their work in using cannabis for epilepsy. And like you said, in the recreational world, it's really about bringing products to market for consumers, which I love, because you can go into a sophisticated cannabis shop now and they have whatever type of delivery mechanism you want. If you want a gummy, you don't want to smoke, you want to. So I think it's been made available recreationally. But what has been missing, Don, is people who are saying, how do we now specifically apply this to health optimization / performance?
Sure.
That niche I think has been untapped, and I see that where you guys fit in perfectly.
We see the same aspect as you. We think, this is our first swing at creating essentially a terpene based supplement. And I don't want to use the term medicine. I use the term supplement here.
Yep.
It's an optimization thing.
Yep.
Um, and there's just a lot. There's a lot here, and so we see the evolution in understanding HRV. You started off talking about. Listen, I believe the same we are. HRV is my key performance indicator. It's one of my tops. It is. I call it the check engine light. That where my tachometer or my speedometer may have more to do with heart rate or some other variable. When HRV is wrong, you need to dig in and figure out what's going on. So it's and I'm excited for at some point in time between the work that you're doing and the evolution of the space. I'm excited to go see my family doc someday and have him ask me about what my HRV data looks like over the
God
last
bless.
3 months. What does
Hallelujah.
what does my CGM data look like, rather than just depending on a once every 3 months or a once every 6 month blood check, which frankly, it just isn't dense enough, and it's
Well, it's a
not
watered
working.
down blood panel. They don't even really dig.
Yeah, and so I think there's some opportunity, and as wearable technology improves, we're going to continue to see this evolve. There's the challenge that we deal with now, and when we dealt with this study, is people are bringing devices to the platform that frankly are not proven. That there's devices out there that say they measure HRV, but if you spend any time looking at the data, their standard deviation of error is way too big. I mean, it's like getting on a scale and saying, I'm going to give you a weight. It's between 20 and 1,000 pounds.
Yeah.
Yes, it weighed me, but the data I got back from it is valueless.
Yeah.
So as these devices improve, and on most days I'm wearing 3 to 4 different devices, trying to figure out what I like, what I don't like, what I'm so this is the beauty. So we limited the study that we did with you guys to a certain group of units. We only used, we only allowed, and I had people asking about Apple Watches and things like that, and I just said, here, Apple is interesting. I think there's some good data there, but I don't think it's being aggregated effectively yet. I don't think you
No,
can.
their HRV data is not really what I would call up to par with other stuff out there.
I'm starting to explore some apps that you can load on top of that Apple platform to see if that can clean it up. I'm just not there yet, but we did this study mainly using Aura Rings, BioStraps, and Cardio Mood. Those are the three.
Perfect. Those are the three I would roll with.
Yeah, that's what we went with, and you know what? It worked out pretty well.
Awesome. So I want to get back to the testing that we collectively did together in a minute here, but I want to just ping you on a few questions that I
Sure.
think can be interesting for discussion. The first question, Don, in my opinion, is why aren't more sports teams, corporate wellness programs, anything where there's a stake in the output of the performance of the human? Like,
Well,
how do you not know at this point in the game that like you have to be tracking this metric on your cohort?
so let's approach that from a couple different directions. Let's start with athletics. Um, Unfortunately, athletics is dominated by dogmented practices. Um, Strength and conditioning is an incredibly dogmented. I'm a West Side guy. I'm a hit guy. I'm a this guy. I'm a that guy. It's not look. It's more about the practice than it is the results.
Gotcha.
And to put this in perspective, when I was with OSU Wrestling, There was one point in time where I had 3 different strength coaches that were working with my team. I had a strength coach that was supplied by the university. I had a strength coach that was supplied that came via our Olympic training center. And my Olympic gold medalist, the one guy I was working with, he had his own guy. And the staff came to me and said, which one should we use? And I said, don't pick, let the athletes choose.
Okay.
Well, in 18, we qualified our entire starting lineup for the national tournament, 10 guys. The breakdown on strength coaches was 3, 3, and 4. As evenly bracket as you can get on a 10-man roster. We had 8 All-Americans, most in school history. The breakdown was 2, 2, and 3. 3 completely different programs dogmatically. Okay. I mean, but what did we learn? We learned that get the weight room open, get the guys in. Once you meet some basic needs, quit arguing about this is Catholic Baptist. Okay. You both read the same book. Even though you're choosing to go to your own buildings and do things that you think are separate, it's largely the same process. So this was one of the things when you start to look at data objectively, these are the things that you learn. And so to go back, when you have dogmatism driving your belief systems, then they're not going to respond to change well. They're not going to understand they don't reach out to figure out. Listen, I had some people that were not happy when I told them that your program's no better than someone else's. It's the same thing. You know what? Because their ego is built on that. Their process is built on that. Now, so I think that's the single biggest challenge to sports programs. And that is the ego and the dogmatism of the particular, whether it's strength and conditioning, whether it's athletic training, whether it's nutrition, any of those are going to struggle with the adaption and the adoption of new technologies that frankly may show them something isn't necessarily correct. I'll go in, I'm going to throw one more piece in here. So with wrestling, we got to where we could predict success at the national level. My daughter just finished up as the director of player development for Northwestern women's lacrosse. They just won a national title about a month ago, and she was running HRV studies on those girls. And I was talking to her. I'm in California right now. She helped me drive over. She said, Dad, she says, I knew that if the team had a score of 60 or greater, and first beat that's not an RMSSD score, something like that. It's just the way they index. Said I knew if we had a score of 60 or better, we'd blow a team out. If we were 50 to 60, it would be a good game. We'd do okay. If it was below 40, we'd lose.
Oh man, I could not agree with you more. And I'm like, why is, oh man, there's so much to get into there, but like that's what I'm saying is like, anytime you have a vested interest in the output of any individual or group, like it's such a strong predictor, and I just don't see enough people using it. I think it's especially okay. Put athletics aside, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's take a group of high performing executives in a company.
Sure.
For example, would be another example. I don't see HRV being used at all.
I have one company in Los Angeles that we're working with that's using HRV in a corporate coaching situation. But other than that, it's not out there.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyhow, let's move on. But I still to this day see that as like the greatest untapped potential in wanting to improve the performance of your cohort. I interviewed a really cool chiropractic doctor on my show up in Canada, Sachin Patel.
Oh.
And in Canada, you cannot, as a chiropractor, run labs for your patients. They're just not legally licensed to do it. And in Canada, there's not like it is here, where you can just tell your patients to go order their own tests and do it themselves. So he's like, I needed a way around the system. My hands were tied because I couldn't order any labs. So he said, I used HRV to work around the system because that's the one metric I knew I could get from everybody
Sure.
legally, and I could calibrate everything for them in real time. So he's just using that as like his proxy metric for like, how are the health of my patients improving? Working around a regulatory system with HRV. So there's so many ways to use the number. I think that the potential in corporate wellness, people who are trading money, anytime there's anything high stakes, high risk, high performance, like even when you go to the gym, like how much you're going to be able to lift. It's all, it all ties back to that number at the end of the day. At least it does for me.
I listen. I see similar processes. Listen. While it's a very old variable, it's a relatively newly understood variable.
Completely.
Um,
It's
and
coming out of the obscure niches. There's definitely teams that have been on this for a while. Look at Elite HRV, right? They got hundreds of thousands of people. So it's not like this is totally underground. It's just
no,
still niche.
well, it's niche, and again, we list, again. So we'll step back towards athletics. Most coaches, most of the, other than the head coach and the assistants that answer are the ones that are really at threat from low performance. No one else associated with the system. If the head coach gets fired, strength coach stays in university, trainer stays in university, nutritionist stays. So that dogmatic nature of what they do stays there.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you've got universities that are scared to death of data. They're scared to death of taking on the responsibility of knowing, wait a minute, there might be something going here, which is a completely broken system. I mean, when that's the case, it's just flat broken. So this is a lot that goes on. I do see it evolving. I do hear some people reaching out. I do hear some athletes. I still have a group of athletes that I consult with. No one that I'm running on a day-to-day basis, but I still have a group of people that come back to me time for time looking for advice. And literally they've learned this is they use it as their indicator. Listen, this has been down. What can I do? What's going on? Go through a series of questions, help bring it up. And it's an incredible KPI.
Yeah. I also, Don, like yourself, I still coach a couple people on the side. I do it A, because I love it, and B,
Yep.
because I also use it as a real field test of Heads Up, the software.
It's
So
how
I
you
need to make
learn,
sure
right?
that, yeah, the software, it has to work flawlessly for my use case,
Right.
or we're going to go strangle the product team. So, I have these poker players. The World Series of Poker is happening right now in Las
Yep.
Vegas. And I have these guys trained to maintain their HRV. They're acutely aware that, like, I'm going to be looking at that as soon as they sink the ring. And then what I also do is I say, how did you perform yesterday? Every morning. And then I correlate their subjective rating of their performance, and it's a 1 to 5. Every day they rate their performance 1 to 5, and
Okay.
we cross reference it with HRV, and I've got them trained to do the same kind of coaching. Basically, there's other things we measure, but every day they know they're going to get a message from me at about 9 in the morning. How did you perform yesterday, and what was your HRV? That's it.
Ironically, we came to Southern California from Vegas, and I was in Vegas for a couple weeks, and I was having dinner one night with a guy that plays in the World Series, and he was aware of HRV, but he wasn't quite sure how to use it. And we're talking about, and I said, so tell me about what happens when you have a bad beat. And he says, I'm done. He says, as soon as that happens, I'm done. And so his HRV, his RMSSD score was in the mid 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, that's your HRV. You work to get that number up, and that bad beat will not impact you as much.
Yep.
And it was the first time that he was really able to put the two things together. But yeah, listen, a lot of the HRV stuff came out of poker, especially the online stuff. I mean, that's where a lot of the research came from. So it's a great application of that.
Hey, next question for you, Don. So this is not necessarily related to your product. It's more of a cannabis question.
Sure.
So sometimes cannabis lowers HRV at night.
You can have an anxiety, and that's a THC thing.
Like sometimes I smoke before bed. It actually makes me very relaxed. I come home from a long workday. I'm winding down at home. I'm starting to do my pre-bed ritual or my pre-bed routine, or I'm going to go down to the pool and sit in the hot tub for a little while with a glass
Yeah.
of wine. You know, all the things you do to wind down. And if I use cannabis, I feel physically much more relaxed, and I sleep very well. But my HRV is going to be lower. Now that's cannabis. That's not CBD. And I'm just wondering if you can maybe educate us on like why that might happen and what you might be able to do to mitigate or reverse so that you get the inverse effect.
Well, the THC is actually an anxiolytic to a certain degree.
Yeah.
So THC will raise anxiety levels. And
Yeah.
this is the challenge with the cannabis market right now, because again, the adult use rec consumer is buying based on THC concentrations. And the fact is, from a medicinal standpoint, very high CBD, CBDA. And I'm not a huge CBD fan. I'm a huge CBDA fan. I'm
Okay.
a huge THCA fan. So
Gotcha.
I love alcohol based, ethanol based extractions of both of those. So the THC can be a bit of an anxiolytic in
Gotcha.
a lot of people. So my recommendation, if that's happening, try and get a strain or start to bump what you're doing with CBDA. You'll see that balance come through.
And maybe, Don, that's a good segue. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how specifically you formulated HRV plus.
So HRV plus, I went after two major ligands, CBDA and beta caryophyllene. Now there's this, it's where they're in there in essentially a 1-to-1 ratio with CBD. So CBD just kind of carried in. For CBD to really reach therapeutic levels, you've got to take almost 5 to 10 times the amount that most people take. And frankly, that market is screwed up right now.
Totally.
You're paying $40 for something that should cost a nickel. Um, and until that adjusts, that you're stuck with that. But so we formulated this. CBD doesn't even hang on a receptor. It plays a role in the metabolism, but it does not trigger a receptor. CBDA does. CBDA lands on CB2 receptors. It lands on 5-HT dopamine receptors. It lands on TRPV pain receptors. So it lands, and so does beta caryophyllene. Beta caryophyllene plays in it's called a dietary cannabinoid. It would be called a cannabinoid if it only showed up in cannabis, but beta caryophyllene comes from like black peppers and mangoes and things like that too. I was just reading in projectcbd.org online, they refer to it as the super terpene. So I love that. I love that terpene. It is very therapeutic. So when you're taking HRV plus, you're getting a nice dose, a known dose of CBDA and beta caryophyllene. You back this up with the omega-3 oils that we have, the omega-3 fats. Most people are deficient in them. So you get your omega-3s up, but we've also booted it up or spiked it with what's called specialized pro-resolving mediators. And these are the biologically available, these are the biologically available resolvents in the inflammatory pathway. So a lot when you're injured or you have something like that, and you've taken an NSAID like Advil or something like that, it blocks some of the enzymes that convert the omega-6 that become the inflammatory molecules. Well, it also blocks the omega-3s from becoming the resolvins. So, but we can now get SPMs. We found these with a manufacturer in Spain, and so that's that combination: CBD, CBDA, beta caryophyllene, omega-3 fats, DHA, EPA, and specialized pro-resolving mediators (SPMs). That's kind of the package that comes together to improve endocannabinoid system tone and lower inflammatory markers, which inflammation drives poor CBD, poor HRV. Inflammation drives poor HRV. if you've got poor HRV, you have an inflammatory issue somewhere.
Yeah. I absolutely love the whole concept, the formulation, and then Don, you guys took it a step further than most supplement companies out there. You said, "Hey, we don't want to just formulate this and make our claims based on what we know about these terpenes," because that's how a lot of supplements are
Sure.
marketed. They take the claims from the raw ingredients that may not even be the same type of raw ingredient, but then they make marketing statements based on research done on raw ingredients, which is very different than what the efficacy will be when those raw ingredients are packaged in a product. So, heads up, and longevity labs, we worked together to do a study to validate this, and we did it with, you mentioned, what is arguably considered the top sensors on the market for HRV. We used Aura Ring, we used BioStrap, and we used CardioMood, and we did a decentralized clinical trial, basically. So
Open
maybe
label
you can
trial. Yep.
tell us about how that project was engineered, because I think it's important for people listening to know that you guys really went and put your money where your mouth is
Well, we
and
wanted,
tested it.
yeah, we had early feedback from our sample runs that we did that, wow, people were seeing a great response in sleep. And you can't fix HRV unless you fix sleep. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. So we knew that was happening. We were getting some early HRV data, but we just wanted to do a more comprehensive look. We wanted to raise the end. So we invited novices. So we did this with people who had not taken the supplement, but did have a history of HRV measurements from their wearable devices. They agreed to be in the study. They did a quick interview to make sure they were a right fit. And then we sent them a bottle of HRV Plus. They followed, and then we started following their data on a daily basis. And we looked at the average of their HRV for 45 days before they started the supplement. Then we looked at the average of their HRV for the 30 days after they used the supplement. We saw a nice little response. We saw about a 12% improvement in HRV.
Mm-hmm.
So the average went from RMSSDs of about 78 up to about almost 80. We saw some really good movements in that. Ironically, we did not see movement in sleep scores or in morning readiness scores. Now, that could have more to do with the algorithm that they use to calculate that than the actual results, but we did not see that. But the thing that was just wonderful is we used the WHO wellness questionnaire. It's a well validated wellness questionnaire. Everyone completed it before and after, and we saw an 18%, almost 18.5% improvement in 30 days just on that wellness questionnaire. So we saw a 12% improvement in the objective HRV data. We saw a 18.4% improvement in the subjective data. So we listen. We know what people are telling us. Love the product. Listen, we had a couple non-responders too. Don't let me leave you under the impression that everyone got the response. We actually, of the first 20 in the first cohort, we had about 3 or 4 that did not respond. We have someone who does not do well with the product, which we address right away, and we understand that happens with cannabis from time to time. But overall, when you look at that, listen, when you can throw a single supplement at a population and get a 12% move in HRV, 18% move in overall wellness, I'll take that every day.
Well, I had a nice improvement in my own numbers. What I had to do actually was dial back the dosage a little bit. So I started with 3 capsules, and that was a little bit too heavy for me. So I backed down to 1, and then I went up to 2, and I'm just about to graduate up to 3. So I had to titrate up a little bit, and that may have just been based on my own unique physiology.
And I'll tell you, probably a third of the people we work with have to play with it a little bit. It's not that straight 3 tablets. And ironically, my daughter who uses it uses one, and I have a lot of females they're using one tablet, gel cap, and they do great on that. I take 8. I'm a big guy, and I had some alternative. I was trying to see if I could pee a hot test on this thing. But 8 is my dosage. So figuring out and we find a lot of males, if they're not getting it with 3, we move them to 4 or 5 a day, and they get the reaction you're looking for. So you got to play with that.
Yeah, I'm ready to pump mine up a little bit. I also know females taking your product that are at 7. So
Really?
that's,
Okay.
again, it's all very N of 1. And there's a little bit of work to do there. So you've got to play with it a little bit. So, Don, the product is now officially part of my nightly stack.
Well, thank you.
I have my ritual that I do every night before bed. There's a couple supplements I take. There's a meditation process I go through. There's setting the PEMF. There's a bunch of things. Put the Aura Ring on. Put the cardio mode on. I have my little routine that I go through. But it's now officially into my stack. My team here at Heads Up also the same. It's for the guys who really are monitoring and tracking HRV. It's part of their stack. I think you really hit the market at the right time with the right product. I think there's a growing increase in understanding of HRV among the general public, mostly because everybody's wearing the devices that track it. Like, I sync my ring in the morning. I don't give a shit about any number in there except the HRV. That's actually the only thing I really look at. I'll glance at like some of the other stuff, like the sleep contributors and things of that nature. But it's primarily HRV. So I think you're timing it perfect.
I think it's a good start. I'll tell you, HRV. So when we talk about HRV, just for the novice out there, we're talking about what's called the root mean square, or this is the vagal tone measure that most people recognize. I'm actually talking to a couple different companies. There's another group of measures that can come from an HRV measure that are called frequency measures. This is low frequency, high frequency, very low. These can be very good numbers, but they are not easy to get from wearable tech. So I'm talking to a couple companies that look like they are on the verge of being able to pull this off. And as they do, I would encourage people to start to take a look at this. There's a great company from out here in California that's called HeartMath that does a really nice.
We know those guys really well.
Love their tech, love what they do. The challenge is they're not necessarily as portable. They're not as wearable as, say, an Aura Ring or a cardio mood or something like that. So as these technologies continue to improve, and we're on the front end of this curve, dramatically on the front end, I think you're going to see that move along. I see a lot of people in this space that are doing good things that you can use HRV to measure. Our mutual friend Patrick Porter, with his brain tap device, they do a nice job. But I see Chuck coming in there saying, Chuck, I could not find those frequencies in that app, but we'll talk more about that. When we're on the front end of this, and again, as the thing, Dave, is that we are learning that our traditional healthcare system is designed to bring someone from like -10 to 0. Okay. Yeah. Very little of healthcare is about going from 0 to 10. So we're seeing
that's a really elegant way to put it, Don. Sorry to interrupt you, but like of all the podcasts I've done, that was a beautiful analogy.
Well, it's not mine. That comes from a psychologist at the University of Chicago, Howard Seligman, who is the father of positive psychology. This came out of his book. But I see it happening in this wellness space as well. And this is where functional medicine comes into play. This is where a lot of these tools come into play. And we started off this podcast with, I can't wait for my doctor to ask me for my HRV data and my CGM data before they go to look at hemoglobin A1C or some other cardiac marker. I believe we're on the verge of that, and these are tools to help with that.
Hey, Don, one thing that would be fun would be for us to like come up with some algorithms that compute a derived score off both of those numbers. Like some representation of your trailing glucose over the last little while, and or maybe some metric of glucose like your standard deviation, or whatever the case might be. There's a formula out there somewhere that could potentially combine both. This would be for the hardcore gearheads out there like me and
Yeah,
you who really want to
I
look at that. But that'd be awesome.
I think so. I was meeting with a company yesterday that had been using galvanic skin response and HRV and so forth, and they were trying to calculate a cortisol load, and they've decided to move away from it because you just can't get the two tied together. But I think that I agree with you. I believe the evidence is there. We have to come up with a mechanism for capturing it in an objective manner that we can then scale.
Yeah.
So I like I said, I think again, you're in a great position where you're at. You're sitting there on top of a bunch of data. As you start to tighten, when I was down at KetoCon down in Austin, Texas, a couple months ago, I came across a group. They've got a continuous ketone monitor now, that you wear like a continuous glucose monitor. And
Yep.
we're dying to find autophagy markers, easily accessible autophagy markers. I think we're going to have something to say about that relatively soon. But when you start, listen, ketone should be a proxy measure for autophagy. Autophagy is a proxy measure for inflammation. Okay, if you have high inflammation, you have low autophagy. You raise your autophagy, you lower inflammation, which results in an improved HRV. It's how that ecosystem comes together, and I think we're at the front end of this, and I'm excited about the future.
Hey, you know what, Don? One of my favorite things in the world is when I've got a quiet weekend at home. I don't have to travel. I don't have a lot of plans. I'll do a 72-hour fast, and I'll
Oh,
start tracking my glucose and my ketones. I track both blood ketone. I use the Keto Mojo, and I
mm-hmm.
also track the breath ketones and glucose, and I watch my body get to a point where actually the glucose and the ketones flip, and there's actually
Mm-hmm.
more ketones in my body than there is glucose. My ketones will be north of 4 millimolars per liter, and that's less than the amount of glucose in my body. And I got to tell you, those weekends, like if you're listening, you've ever done a 72-hour or a longer term fast, your neurotransmitters in your brain just go into like hyper awareness, hyper euphoria mode. So a good 72 hours, one of my favorite things to do. And then I'll stack it with other things like some nootropics and stuff like that.
Do
So
you do
one
you
of the
see your
best natural.
do you see
Go
your
ahead.
HRV running opposite of your ketones?
That's a really good question. Just based on the last 72 hour I did. So night one, HRV was at baseline. Night two, it actually went down. So I was
Yeah,
starting to see a little bit of a stressor once I was 48 hours plus into the fast.
sure.
And then I obviously day three is when I'll come out of the fast, and then I haven't gone back to look retroactively at it. But the whole point is I like putting my body into those really just pulsing it in like once a quarter into those really extreme states of autophagy and just going and flushing out the plumbing in there and rebooting the whole system. So
Listen, I think that's critical. I mean, but people need to realize if you're an aggressive faster, your HRV. Listen, when you fast, the body recognizes it's starvation. It dumps cortisol. It releases existing energy stores. The cortisol is going to
and
drive HRV.
toxins too. You're breaking
Yes,
down fat molecules. You're breaking down toxins as well. So like it's a stressor, but I have for me personally, right? This is different, and I've done several of these fasts now. So the first one I did was awful, but I'm at the point now where my body actually loves it. Like I'll see a small decrease in HRV, but most of the time, my energy levels are off the charts. My thinking capacity, I feel 10x better when I'm
Yeah.
48 hours fasted than I do when I'm eating, which doesn't make a lot of sense intuitively, but
Thank you,
it's how
beta
it is.
hydroxybutyrate. That's what's going on.
Yeah,
Um,
amen to
hey,
that.
let's answer Michael's question here.
Yeah,
He
fire
says
away. Take it, Don.
he's interested in knowing more about the typical actions which someone can take based on the output monitoring of HRV. So, what are typical actions? So, I talk about the 4 rocks in the jar for longevity, and these apply to HRV as well. If you so HRV is the measurement in the difference in times between heartbeats. Okay, so the more you can expand the distance between heartbeats to create opportunity for variability, the better. So the more cardiovascularly fit you are, the lower your resting heart rate, the more opportunity you have for improved HRV. Okay, so that's potential. That's so if I want to raise my potential HRV, I start by improving my cardiovascular fitness, and I see that in a drop in my nighttime resting heart rate.
So
Um,
you're running, you're going, you're doing things that are going to make you sweat hard,
I
keep the
don't
heart
run.
rate.
I
Don't
don't
run.
run. Okay,
But
running.
but
I
I'm
don't think
saying in
running.
general, you want to
Yeah.
do something that's going to make you. You're going to work hard enough. You're going to exert hard enough that it's going to strengthen the heart muscle. For 10, 20, 30 minutes. How would you describe it, Don?
I'm a huge advocate of zone 2, zone 3 training.
Yeah.
So when you look at your heart rate monitor, you have 5 zones. You break it into the 5-zone system. Training in zone 2 and 3, you get the mitochondrial benefits, you get the enzymatic benefit. You do not get cortisol. So when you're training hard enough that you're touching zone 4 and zone 5, you're creating cortisol, which is going to create a sympathetic response. If you'll do your cardiovascular training or the majority of it below zone 3, you get the benefits, you get the mitochondria, you get the enzymes, you get the buildup, but you don't pay the cortisol price. So this is huge for me.
Yeah,
And
I'm
when
going to be paying the cortisol price tonight, Don, because I do a Friday night hot Bikram yoga workout,
well, there
which
you go.
means for 90 minutes, I'm in 105 degrees, and it's like, the heart rate is up there in the high 170s, 180s. But I know I'm going in there specifically to do that. There's also days where I know I'm just going to go onto the stair climber or the treadmill and set a nice incline and keep my heart rate at like 140 for like 30 to 45 minutes, which is more like what you're talking about.
Well, and Dave, I'll tell you, when you're doing hot yoga, listen, I've spent a lot of time looking at this. I mean, when I get into a sauna, when I I live in an RV now, and I have an infrared sauna in my RV that only goes to 140 degrees, but it does enough. When I'm in the sauna that I really like, my traditional sauna, I'm usually in for like 205 degrees for 45 minutes.
So
Um, but I'm not moving, and I'm not convinced there's a cortisol response. There's certainly a heart rate increase because
yeah.
it's got to increase circulation, but I'm not sure we're dumping cortisol. So I need to study that a little bit more. So I'm not entirely sure your Bikram yoga is going to cause a cortisol response. A CrossFit workout will.
Well, the yoga workout is also something that for me is deeply meditative. So even though I'm doing something physically demanding, obviously I have no weights. I'm working with my own body. I'm
Right.
breathing through my nose the entire time. People
I
don't realize like it's hot in there and you're working hard, but you're breathing through your heart is pounding, but
yeah.
you're breathing in and out through the nose only.
So you don't have a high oxygen CO2 respiration going on. If your breathing's limited, if you're able to do that, but you do have high heart rate for circulating heat and managing heat. I get that. I'm not sure, but so to go answer your question, I'm not sure the Friday night Bikram yoga is going to cause the cortisol response. The
Well,
the the CrossFit workout will. The running, it's very difficult to run. Most people do not have a fitness level that they can run in zone 3.
yeah,
Most people run in zone 4,
yeah.
and they just beat themselves up. I love cycling more than running, because you can cycle for a long time and not tear yourself up. So going back to Michael's question, it starts with your base fitness. Number two, you've got to have the nutrients necessary to meet the body's need to either build or break down. So a nutrient dense diet is critical. Number three, if you want to raise HRV, you have to fix sleep. Sleep is when you recover, it's when you regenerate, it's when you reload the resources in the system. You have to have good sleep. And then my fourth big rock, the thing that I do, and I actually see a nice little HRV pop with mine, is I do red light therapy. So I have a red light
Beautiful.
system. I have a red light system, and that's a very healing modality. So those things are tools that I will use, Michael. But it starts. Listen, if you don't have good cardiovascular fitness, you don't have much potential to move the HRV. You improve your cardiovascular fitness, less beats per minute, more space between beats. You have more potential to improve. Nutrients, key nutrients. And your key nutrients, the one you're lacking in. So you got to figure that out. Everybody's a little different there. Sleep is critical. Fix that sleep environment. And that's what we did with my athletes. That was the big thing. We used a lot of sensory deprivation floating. The float tanks move the needle on HRV. They're wonderful. We talked about the brain tap. The brain tap is a good tool. It's a good meditative device. I like Heart Math. They have a good biofeedback based meditative system. Straight meditation is great. I'm not going to minimize that at all. Michael, be careful because it may take some time for that practice to kick in. For instance, when we would do floats, the HRV during the float sometimes would drop. But the next day we'd get a super compensation bump from it.
Nice.
So It takes time for the physiological trigger to kick in.
Yep. You elegantly explained why. I have always heard from many people that increasing your cardiovascular fitness is one of the best ways to do it. It was good to get the explanation on the why, which is you're creating more possibility because you have
Right.
that was really helpful for me. I just didn't fully understand the why. So anyhow, Don, this product that you developed is going to keep getting better and better,
We
and
hope so.
I'm sure that you're going to uncover more opportunities, like you said, just being able to start looking at some of these more subclinical variations and frequencies of the HRV is going to help you as well. So I think we're just at the beginning of the journey here. Quick from Michael, thank you for answering my question. He prioritizes 1, 2, and 3. I suppose, if anything, I probably overtrain. Yeah, there you go.
Well, and I'll tell you, it's not about. And Michael, I want to be careful here. I don't believe in the term overtraining. There's maladaptive training and there's adaptive training. Okay. If you'll drop your training down into that 2-3, it's difficult. It's difficult to overtrain. There's a benefit that comes from it all the time. Overtraining is a cortisol trigger. So that anytime that you're driving a lot of cortisol, you've got to bring that down. You do that below zone 3 and below. So start to shift. There's a really good guy, Alan Cousins. If you train and you want to follow a good guy on social media, there's a guy out of Boulder. His name's Alan Cousins. He does a brilliant job of coaching with distance athletes, cyclists, triathletes, but this applies to all sports and all humans. And he's even more dramatically pushing towards zone 1, zone 2. Once you step into athletics, particularly recreational athletics, it becomes a problem. But that's for what it's worth, Michael. Thanks for asking. Thanks for listening.
Well, the problem, Don, is you got the junkies like us. We just like to go in there and destroy ourselves. It's a high. At some point, it is a high. You
It
know what I
makes
mean?
dopamine.
But you also have
Absolutely.
so there's that part of it, which is just like, there's the part of you that really just goes into the gym and like really likes to just work really fucking hard. So like you got to balance all that stuff out, but you got to have that other form of training in there. And then you got to also have the rest of your modalities ready. You got to have your meditation game. You got to have the HRV plus. You got to know how to take the nervous system down. That's actually a skill, central nervous system management and intellectually knowing how to be in tune with where your nervous system is at. There's actually you can do. Like for me, one of the biggest therapies for me, red light being one. The other one is water. I strategically use water, jacuzzi, steam sauna, swimming
Mhm.
pool. So there's lots and lots and lots of things you can do to make sure that you're keeping things in balance, even if you do go in there and like to destroy yourself every once in a while.
Yeah, I think I've gotten past that.
I haven't, Don. I'm working on it. I'm in a support group, but I haven't really gotten over it yet.
I think I've passed that, so I'm okay with that. But
Yeah.
yeah, we'll see. Um, I'm sure it'll come up.
Hey,
Listen, when you compete as in Big Ten wrestling, okay.
yeah,
Back then it was balls to the walls 24/7. Okay,
yeah,
it was unrelenting.
yeah.
And I remember, so I wrestled nationals my senior year. I fly home from Oklahoma City. I empty out my wrestling bag. I fill it with spring break clothes. We fly to Florida. I'm drunk for 10 days straight, fly back to Columbus, and I'm sitting there on my bed about a week afterwards. And it's the first week in my life, and it's my first week in the last 3 years that I didn't train for wrestling every day. Every
Yeah.
day. I separate out the Fort Lauderdale, but I remember sitting on my bed. I used to finish practice with 5 ice bags, usually 2 shoulders, 2 knees, and an elbow. Um, and I remember waking up in the morning thinking, I don't hurt. Um, I've not felt this in a long time, and I kind of liked it. So as I started to pour myself into other activity, I started doing a lot of cycling. That's the beauty of
Yeah.
cycling. You can go ride your bike for 5 hours and not be beat up. I mean, you may be drained, but you won't be beat up. I rehydrate, I refuel, and I can go ride my bike again the next day. So that's kind of that was my learning situation. Again, 8 knee surgeries later, and all the things that go with competing at level, you learn to mitigate and control that a little bit more.
Don, you touched on it briefly, but I want to come back and put a little bit of emphasis on what you talked about with heart math, with
Mm-hmm.
coherence training, and what you briefly mentioned with various forms of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Meditation's hard for a lot of people who think that they have to sit there and keep their eyes closed and breathe, which you do, but it's hard. I've gotten really good at it over the years, but I want to talk more about the importance of nose breathing. I want to see if you have opinions, like, for example, mouth tape when you sleep, emphasizing during the day to breathe through the nose, different types of breath work you can do. There's a lot of different ways to breathe where you're learning to control breath or prana. So, can you share any best practices, Don, on breathing?
My recommendation is keep it simple. So if you just simply adopt, okay, first of all, when I would put my guys into float tanks, I would not put a guy in a float tank until they finished at least 5 days of the Headspace app. I'd make them load.
Beautiful.
I'd make them load Headspace on their phone, because when you get in that tank, literally you're in there, and all you have are your thoughts, your breath, and your heartbeat. That's
Yeah, you
it.
might wig out.
Yeah, well, and I had some guys that struggled with that. So and meditation is a skill, just like any other skill. It's a skill. That was brilliant, wasn't it? Um, but So I'd always start in there. But the other thing that we taught was what we called recovery breathing. So
Okay.
the literature is pretty clear. 6 breaths a minute, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, has a nearly excuse me, a nearly ideal response on parasympathetic boosting, on raising.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, Don, but there's actually meditations and mantras, chanting, that keep you at that 6 breath per minute level.
So listen, you can do it with your Apple Watch. You can do it with, there's a lot of, so start there. Now, I'll tell you, Dave, what we did with the wrestling team was when we were beginning our warm up prior to practice, we put a clock on the wall with a second hand. One of my alumni, Dr. Ron Garbo, gave it to us. And Ron is a pain management doc and an HRV guy out in the Virginia Beach area. So I said, I want 6 breaths, 1 minute of your time. We would do that while they're warming up. So we learned to do breathing while they moved. And then at the end of practice, when they were laying down, the coach had done their talk, I would take another minute, another 6 breaths. Give me 6 breaths. It was so cool to watch my athletes. I had an athlete wrestling in the national finals. He goes out of bounds. We used to teach body position as far as a parasympathetic boost, like Superman pose, head up, chest back, arms back.
Yeah.
This kid goes out of bounds. He's in a Donnybrook in the finals, head, shoulders back. I see him catch 2 rescue breaths on the way back to the middle of the mat. So he gained an advantage through the practice of recovery in the middle of the match in the national finals.
Huge advantage, like just knowing how to get a recovery breath, and even knowing, okay, I've got 30 seconds here to catch my breath. I need to control the inhale and the exhale. It's going to be a little uncomfortable, but I got to inhale slower than my body would want, and then exhale a little slower than the body would want, and like you get that recovery breath, and it's an advantage.
If you're practice, you don't even think about it. Okay, you're again. Critical thing for athletic performance is staying in flow, staying in zone, staying on concentration on the task at hand. So this is critical for the flow state. So you want to wire these skills in before you get there. So again, he had done this in practice so many times that when he came in off the mat, it was just his natural
response. Instinctively, it clicked in.
Yep. The same as walking. I mean, you don't have to think about walking to the center of the mat. That's wired in. And as you practice these recovery breathing and this stuff, and again, he gained an advantage right there. What was it critical? Who knows? But you want to, at that level, you want everything you can get.
I practice recovery breathing when I'm really putting myself in challenging training situations.
Yep.
So, for example, I'll do a heavy set on back squat, for instance, and I'm gassed after the set, but I just kind of stand there at the squat rack. I close my eyes, and I really concentrate on getting the recovery breaths.
Yeah.
Or I'll put myself in an isometric hold where I set a timer for 60 seconds and I'm going to hold isometric for 60. The only way I'm going to make it to 60 is if my eyes are closed and I'm controlling my respiratory rate. I can do a 60-second hold, exactly 6 breaths.
And you're shutting down the voice in your head that says quit.
Exactly. So like I practice that when I anytime I do something that challenges my cardiovascular, where I feel like I'm breathing heavy. Anything in day-to-day life, you practice it. I teach a lot of I teach Kundalini yoga, which is a lot of it's yoga for the mind, and it's a lot about learning how to control breath. And actually, controlling breath is controlling life. And when you can control your breath in a difficult situation, you control the situation.
You know what the Sanskrit for yoga means? To yoke the mind to the body. That's what yoga means. Yep. So it is a somatic meditative environment. But you're putting movement into it. That's the beauty of it. And I think it's also a flow environment. I don't know if you study flow as described by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi or Stephen Kotler.
Yeah.
Okay, so these are critical flow environments, and it's critical that you keep concentration at the task at hand. You got to build those skills so that when you're under challenge, you pull them in. So I'm a huge flow guy. Listen, if you don't enjoy what you do, you won't keep doing it. So the hard stuff, you got to figure out how to make it enjoyable. And most of it is, you can enjoy standing on the side of the mountain, 30 degrees below zero. If you make a wrong step, you fall. It may not be pleasurable, but it will be enjoyable. And this is what's so important.
Well, and then you got guys like us who are entrepreneurs who are basically out there taking insane risks and living day to day in situations that most people would not be able to handle because there's so much risk in what I do every day. So I practice in the gym learning how to be comfortable in situations that are uncomfortable, because when I wake up in the morning and I go to build a company, you're dealing with risk every day. You have to learn how to enjoy things that make other people uncomfortable.
Do,
It's
do
just
we have
reality.
to? Do we have to call it insane risks? I mean, there's a certain level of sanity there.
I love it. So for me, it's actually there's nothing else I'd rather be doing.
Yeah,
But I know for a lot of people, it's like, yeah, there's danger there. You got a gun to your head, so you got to be just a little bit, a little off.
yeah,
But
I'm okay with that.
me too. It's the
I'm
greatest
not.
compliment you can give me is when you tell me I'm crazy. Actually,
Well, there's a fine line between insanity and genius, and you just got to matter. You got to stay on the right side of it.
yeah, fair enough. Well, hey, we could jam forever here, Don. I think we're way over on time, so we should probably call it. But tell us where to get the product and anything
So,
else you want to leave the listeners with.
so go to modemethod.com, modemethod.com, modemethod.com. That's where you find HRV Plus. If you want to learn more about autophagy and longevity, you can go to our website, spermidinelife.us. That's where you find, we can't put the two products on the same website because of cannabis restrictions. But modemethod.com for HRV Plus, spermidinelife.us for our spermidine products. If you want to get a hold of me, you can find me on all the socials, LinkedIn. I'm Don Moxley on most of that. For the other Don Moxleys in the world that want to have that as a social, I've just been way ahead of them.
Well, they're posers.
Pardon?
They're posers.
You know what?
Wannabes.
They may have something going, but it's not me.
No. And
Um,
we'll be seeing Don at the conference. If you're at the biohacking conference in Orlando, which is coming up June 22 to 24, Don will
and
be there.
I'm doing a talk on both of these. So I'm doing a talk on all this at the conference.
Awesome.
I think my talk is Friday.
All right. Well, thank you for pioneering this, Don, on behalf of everyone here at Heads Up.
I appreciate
And
that.
we wish you guys the best of success. And hopefully, we'll have another opportunity to chat more with you, Don. This was a great
You too.
interview.
Listen, we're so thankful to work with a company like yours, to have the ability. Trust me, I've done dashboard development, I've done data management. What you guys do with Heads Up Health is special, and I'm looking forward to watching you guys grow in the future.
It's a labor of love, my friend.
Yes.
All right. Signing off.